we've done a survey of 14 to 18-year-olds called Question the Quo, and we have 6 different cycles of data. And there were 3 data points that I thought was just really important. The 3 stats that jumped out at me that I think frame this context is that 85% of these high schoolers, 14 to 18, really feel pressure. It might be personal pressure, it might be pressure from the adults in their lives, the faculty that are teaching them, but they feel pressure to pursue a 4-year pathway. And they feel like that's the only pathway to success. And yet 50% of those same individuals don't believe that pressure and really feel like there are lots of options for them to be successful in the future. The second stat that jumped out at me is that more than half of the teens we surveyed worry, stress, and think about what is the best post-secondary education option for them every single day. And if they're focused on that, we should make sure they've got the tools that they need to make the best decision. And then finally, 3/4 of the people we interviewed really felt like it was important for them to have tools so they could plan out their career and then back into what post-secondary education pathway they should go down. But only 40% of them have tools like that they feel they can rely upon to make the best decision. So with stats like that, there's really a long way to go to make sure that our young people have the information they need so they can feel empowered that they're making the best decision for their future. So with stats like that, I want to open it up to all 3 of you to start off with. What comes to mind when you hear stats like that? And can you describe a little bit of the work that each one of your organizations is doing to try to address some of this? Tamika, let's start off with you.
Thanks, Heidi, for the question. In my work at the College Place Richmond, we work closely, we partner with state agencies, high schools, middle schools, even community-based organizations to essentially stand in the gap, make sure that folks have knowledge, skills, and resources to help students get ready for the next step. And the data that was collected through the most recent iteration through Question the Quo really speaks to the experiences that we're seeing from students across the board. They are hesitant. They are very apprehensive about pursuing post-secondary pathways. Why? Because they've seen people in their day-to-day lives who've pursued post-secondary education and for some reason it didn't work out so well. They see their relatives and community members who pursued college and didn't graduate. And so some of them have a lot of student loan debt and they're like, why would I sign up for that? They also see folks who graduate who aren't able to make a family-sustaining wage. So they're like, I don't really know what to do and I'm scared about what's next. They are really looking for opportunities to make money independently and make it now. And so a lot of people assume that, oh, geez, Gen Zs want to be influencers. Yeah, some of them do, right? But it's the why behind the reason why they want to be influencers. They want to be influencers for the autonomy to make money and to make it now and be able to control those strings. So in some of the school districts that I've been working closely with, we've seen them kind of shift a lot of their vocational and technical programming to some of those programs where they can get short training credentials and make money immediately. One of the school districts that I work closely with have now been offering more cosmetology and barbering classes because students want to be able to make money right now and be able to control how they make that money. So definitely the data that we're collecting speaks heavily to the things that we're seeing in the field. But that's just what we're seeing with students. For those who are actually training and supporting them, they're undertrained and overwhelmed, to be honest. A lot of schools have 1 or 2 college or career coordinators responsible for 800 seniors. And that's just seniors. We're talking about how early should this conversation start. It should start in middle school. But if the only folks who are doing college and career work are supporting 11th and 12th graders, we're already starting at a disadvantage. That prep has to start much earlier. So we really are encouraging college and career folks to be updated in the information. So a lot of the work, some of the work we do at TCP is training folks around the latest trends in college access and post-secondary prep and financial aid, but also how to have those tough conversations because they're really terrified to say the wrong things to parents and students. And so helping them to have effective conversations to move the needle forward for sure.
Thank you. I love the statistics, and hopefully everyone here takes time to read the data that ECMC is coming up with because it really is game-changing for all of us. I love what you were talking about, Tamika, about how this affects everyone in the ecosystem, and it's so important that we become more fluent in this. I've been working on this issue for 30 years now, since I was 19 myself. I realized, just like these kids in the survey, that at 13 I had no idea what I was going to do with my life, and it stressed me out. I've been building solutions for 30 years now, and what this looks like on the ground, as many of you in education know, is that kids come up to me crying and shaking over the fear and the anxiety. It happens to me all the time. And what I find is that sometimes the things that are game-changing for them are the most simple answers to very specific questions they have. I got to travel to 60 countries talking to students, and what I found was that sometimes there were very little solutions, very simple answers that connected the dots. We built Exploring Your Potential to address the hundreds of little information gaps that young people have. What I see as the biggest problem is, one, we need to put this in the curriculum. It has to be part of general learning. We taught home ec, we taught life skills, we teach social studies so they're ready for the world, but we're not teaching them the most basic things. We've all said we should learn budgeting in school, but today the world is changing so fast, we need to teach workforce. We need to show them how they can activate themselves as emerging talent in the world. That's why I spent the first 20 years working on entrepreneurship too, because 60% of our students, we find constantly by surveying tens of thousands of them, are interested in more entrepreneurial options. Yet all of our workforce training tends to focus on jobs. So I was one of those kids that was shaking and crying in college, saying, I don't want to be a manager in a big company at the School of Management. And it took my career counselor to say, it's okay, you can be an entrepreneur. By teaching even entrepreneurship at the very earliest ages, you can teach that to a fifth grader and teach them that they can build or create or invent anything in the world that they want. That's how you engage them, as far as I'm concerned. But getting it into the curriculum and training the trainers, the teachers, about what workforce looks like, I think is really critical. And thank you for all the work that you all do in funding these programs and executing these programs, because we all as a community need to amplify now.
That's wonderful. So I think from ASA's perspective, we as an organization, much like ECMC, spent a lot of time in the post-secondary education space, counseling on student loans, counseling on financial education. What we were seeing was that by the time kids got to us for counseling, they had made a lot of ill-informed choices about why they were in post-secondary education to begin with. And so the conversation then became for us as an organization is, how are we more proactive in helping kids at a much earlier age think about how their own personal interests align with long-term post-secondary education and ultimately career. And so we changed our mission 7 years ago now to really focus on that journey from middle school through a diverse set of post-secondary education pathways. And how do you support students along that continuum? We find through a lot of data that we're not saying we want kids to pick in middle school what they want to be. That's not at all I think what we're getting at here. But we see in data that kids that have not been exposed to opportunity begin to foreclose things by the end of middle school. So how do we create opportunity multipliers for students? Make them see that there is possibility in post-secondary education, make them see that there's possibilities in careers that might not exist in their community or amongst their family members, to ensure that they have greater opportunity and it's not just one path that will fit all. So that's ultimately what we're aiming to do.
Julie, something came to mind when you were articulating that people self-select out at an early age.
Absolutely.
And part of that is they self-select out because their parents don't help, or whoever's in their support system don't help support them, and that they can really be anything.
And yes, yeah,
but the world is wide open. So what are some tools that you all use or have found that can really help not only that middle schooler, but the middle school teacher? And the support system really help them understand what the art of the possible is.
So there are a lot of wonderful digital tools and curriculum-based tools that are popping up in the career exploration space. The things that we really focus on are key questions for students. No matter what the tool is, we would like kids to understand what they're good at, what they like, what the world needs, and what they can get paid for. In the middle of those four things is a set of career possibilities that will fit with the long-term interests of a child. You don't have to pick that now in middle school, but start thinking along that lines of, how can I have experiences that let me discover those four key questions in my own life for my own strengths, for my own loves, and that really critical piece of then fitting it into what I can get paid for and what the world needs. Because we all, every kid might want to be a game designer, but there's only a limited number of positions available in that particular field. So how do you use those same skills in other ways? So that's one piece of it. That's really what we focus on in middle school. In high school, as kids are beginning to have more of an ability to interact with the job market, how can then kids get work-based learning experience that actually expose them to career? And it just as importantly as being able to build career skills in those experiences, how does that more define what I love or quite possibly what I hate, because I realize I hate actually working in an office. And I've now discovered that much earlier in my education trajectory, before the risk of failure is too high. We often see kids having these experiences in college when they've already picked a major, they've already paid money towards a specific degree. It's now junior year and they discover they hate the sight of blood even though they're a nursing major. Right? How can we de-risk some of those choices by moving them much earlier in the education pipeline and having that exploration piece done in the high school years?
Can I throw a quick story out on that? The hating the sight of blood. I've talked to students who have gone all the way through medical school and hated blood and didn't tell anyone that. I had a kid wait online at four hours to talk to me after I keynoted a conference at Harvard. 7 doctors in the immediate family said her whole goal in life was to be a doctor because her family told her to do it. This is on the higher end, obviously, of affluence. She wanted to be in frozen desserts. Like after a 5-minute conversation with her, she quit medical school, went on to work at the White House with Obama, and then got funded by Mark Cuban, and now is one of the top ed tech entrepreneurs. But it took a conversation, and her fear was so strong that even at Harvard, she was so terrified to talk about what she wanted to do, and she hated blood and was going to medical school. So these kids are filled with fear, and I think sometimes what we have to do is give them permission to do the things that they love, not talk them out of it, but give them permission to explore, teach them industries, teach them companies, teach them the language of business, and let them free. Let them find the work-based learning opportunities, the internships, get the exposure, but to the real business world.
Yeah, just to piggyback off of there, 2 things that came to mind. Your original point, Holly, about whose onus is it, whose responsibility is to make sure students have exposure. Students really are working against generational challenges with parents. Like, that's very much so real. I even think about my own elders who told me, you gotta get that college degree. Once you get that degree, no one can take it from you. And I go, yeah, they can't take the degree, but they also can't take the debt either. So, I mean, when I'm having frank conversations with parents and students, I'm having very real conversations around it. One story comes to mind. A student reached out to me 2 summers ago. I don't know how he got my information, but he had just graduated from high school and talked to some buddies of his and decided that he wanted to pursue this CTE credential. And his mom was pushing for him to get the 4-year degree. You know, she was of the generation that, you know, her parents worked really hard in factories, and so she wanted her child to be able to get that college degree and hold tight to it. Well, the kid was very clear in his communication to me. I know what I want to do. Like, I've talked to my friends, I've talked to leaders in this field, and they say all I need is this. Can you talk to my mom and convince her that this is what makes sense? And so going into the conversation with this, you know, it just kind of reminded me, kids need advocates. They need folks who do know the research, who do know the data, who do know what are the in-demand fields in your region and what's the data to back it up. What are the salaries, the entry-level salaries for folks in that field? Parents want the information. They want the data. If I could come to them and say, with what he wants, he will start making X. He will earn up to X. Parents feel a little bit more comfortable about that, but all they're operating off of what are their notions of what success even looks like. Even the idea of, my kid is smart enough to go to 4-year school. Why are they pursuing a carpentry certification? And so trying to reprogram around like smart enough, what does that even mean? This work should be recentered on the student to figure out what is it that they want to do, and then how we can create a clear path to career attainment for them. So yes, parents definitely play a big role. Schools certainly play a big role. We still celebrate when 100% of the students are accepted to college. And that's great and all, but if they're not interested in careers that require a college degree, why are we pushing them along that trajectory?
And I think looking at the stats of some of those high schools that have 100% acceptance rate, what's the college graduation rate? And what's the debt related to that? And then really starting to change that whole paradigm. So for those school districts that aren't as progressive or don't have the funds to start in middle school, what are different ways, and maybe Jennifer, if you could start off this conversation, that we can start having these discussions about career exploration in our classrooms, around our dining tables, at our churches, and how do we make it in a way that's both educational with the data, but also inspiring, so that people know that the sky's the limit.
I think these are fundamental conversations that happen every day. They're conversations we all have with all the young people we have in our lives. There are conversations parents have and schools have. I think we need to connect what they're interested in immediately with industry, with opportunity, with jobs. Show them as they walk through the world if they're interested. I was on NPR a few years ago and they said, oh, you know, my kid wants to he plays band all the time and he's playing his drums, and I told him he can't do that with his life. I said, with all due respect, do you realize that there's a music industry with thousands of jobs in the music industry where people do play in bands, but they also market bands and they package them and they write music and they coach them and they counsel them and they style them. And I think there's so much opportunity in the world that if we start to reframe our conversation, I think we've overcomplicated things. We've created all these silos and all these labels. It's workforce readiness, not career readiness, and we're going to do this at middle school and that at high school. Let's start talking to young kids about opportunity is everywhere. Everywhere you go. Someone made this chair, someone made this microphone, someone dressed us today, someone helped us, you know, get where we're going. Start to talk to them about how the world works and what that their jobs attached to all of these things. And if they're not jobs, they're entrepreneurs creating and building things. I think that's how you get them excited, and then when you connect with opportunities in the world, like the United Nations, the Sustainable Development Goals, what problems do you want to solve? Well, how do you want to do it? Do you want to do it as an entrepreneur, as an employee? Do you want to do that now? Do you want to do that in the future? Do you want to, you know, I think that's where the conversation starts. But again, I think we have to put it into curriculum too, to give the teachers and the parents the guidance on how to even teach this now.
Yeah,
I think just one point, I think it goes beyond just, here are all the jobs, but here's the pathway to get to that job. I think there was a stat yesterday at a session I was at that 50% of the jobs in the United States the employee doesn't have a degree. And really making it normalized, that there are technical skills you need to get, there are all sorts of different ways to get that job. And absolutely some jobs require a degree, but not all of them. And changing that perception in the young people's mind, that that's the only way to get to that job.
But also getting them clear on what they want, even for now. Then you go through the rigor of these are what the opportunities look like, this is the pathways. But even Madonna said she would never have done what she did if she knew what was involved in it. So I think we have to be careful about how soon we expose them to some of this detail. That's the only thing I would caution, but I think you're so right. There needs to be that pathway laid out for them, but we're missing that initial spark. We're giving them a la carte menus of what they can do with their life and saying, pick something, and then showing them career paths, and that's why I think they're opting out in large numbers.
I would also add to that I think the question of what do you want to be is a very difficult question for young people, right? They can't be what they can't see. And if we have not exposed them to opportunity, that is an impossible and an overwhelming question to ask a child. So even that narrative change piece, I think is a really, really important place to start.
I think it's really important for them to know what's possible. Asking a kid, what do you want to do? They're going to choose whatever, the low-hanging fruit, whatever they see. More often, everyone now wants to be like an animated design, and they want to be things that they see more regularly. So the exposure is really big. And you know, oftentimes we say, I agree, Jim, we need to add it to the curriculum, but it's about how we add it to the curriculum. There has to be partnership with folks who are in the industry, folks who are experts in financial aid, folks who are experts in pathways. I don't think it's necessary for the middle school teacher or counselor or the parent or the guidance counselor to skill up on all of these things in order to be effective. But there should be some bridges built between like the industry world and those who specialize in middle school instruction and curriculum. I see some of the programs that are rolled out now for career exploration for middle schoolers, and I think there is no possible way they engage with anyone who created content or understand instruction for high school kids or middle school kids. There is no way that this is gonna land. So there should be more partnership and engagement with those who are in the educational spaces who specialize in this work to be able to know what's most developmentally appropriate for a middle schooler when they're trying to receive information or process information about various careers. That's gonna be important. So the more intentionality around partnership building is key to this work, not necessarily giving people more on their plate to learn to be able to specialize in supporting students.
I think one other thing that we focus on quite a bit is how do we provide supplemental services to what is happening in the school district. School districts cannot and should not be expected to do this on their own. So we provide a lot of free services digitally direct to students. We have YouTube videos that kids can watch that sort of spur questions in them of how should I start thinking about these opportunities. We also encourage and are looking to see how we can help expand career exploration activities that are happening in out-of-school time programs. Out-of-school time providers are a huge resource in this way, community-based organizations that can support the expansion of programming and are not necessarily burdened by a lot of the internal restrictions that a school district might have on them. So how do we reach kids where they are in everyday community activities, in social media, because we know they're online, and use those opportunities to start conversations about really important topics?
That's a great point. Just to piggyback off that, it's really important to build connections with folks outside, on the other side of the school wall. Even using the term student implies school enrollment, school attendance. But what about students who engage more with the Department of Juvenile Justice or engage more with their social worker than their teacher on a regular basis? How are they receiving college access or career exploration support? They aren't. And if we look at the data, about 3 million young people annually engage with those particular agencies. So we have to think about ways we can lean in to best engage them. At TCP Richmond, we've built relationships with the foster youth agency that supports DSS in the state to make sure we're leaning into those students who really could use these resources, are in high demand for these resources. And so align them with the appropriate support. But think about the students who aren't necessarily engaging, who don't have access to resources that are connected with their school. They still need the support to get on the other side. And so we need more programs, and not to say like more programs like ours, but definitely more programs that are able to work outside of the context of the school without paywalls. Because that's one of the huge challenges too, being able to access some of those great programs, even training modules to help folks to be updated on this information. Folks have to go through a paywall. So that's not really super helpful for students, particularly those in high-need communities, to be able to access effective tools for success.
But also, that speaks to the value of groups like ECMC and ASA, because they're funding programs. And I think that connective tissue is so incredibly important. I mean, we have a program. I've had people ask to give it to 50,000, 200,000 students. But then the next question is, can you also pay for it? I can't do that as a social entrepreneur. I don't have an organization that has the coffers to do that. So I think really looking at the ecosystem and looking at the layers of how we create this connective tissue is so valuable, and that's why I'm so grateful for all the people on this panel who do that work, who do that research, who are really looking at that, because there are inequities everywhere, and there's also inequity with opportunity even at the funding level of entrepreneurs. Even at the access, it's, you know, the hardest working people in education, you always say, are the teachers. I would also say some of the entrepreneurs running around here building tools to solve the problems are also operating underfunded, not being paid. So thank you for everyone that's here and the work that you're doing too. And really, let's just keep looking at this at the ecosystem level and through all the slices and creating more opportunity, more connectivity.
Absolutely. I think one thing, you know, you've suggested several solutions that are helping move the needle. But I think we've all experienced that sometimes we learn more from our failures. And so have you, each one of you, tried something that just has missed the mark? Or have you identified something that just is the barrier why we aren't getting through and this information isn't getting to the kids and their support system like it needs to be?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. So I think one of the things that we learned was we provided for a number of years direct grants to schools to roll out middle school career exploration. They could do it in any way that they wanted. There are many different models that were provided. If it did not have administrative support from the top down, and it was in multiple areas of the organization, as soon as the teacher left, the program went away. Right? There was no way of sustaining something that was really someone's sort of pet project. So how do we think about these wholesale systems change activities so that it is deeply ingrained in the culture of a school, in what every teacher and administrator believes in? It can't be a side project. It has to be really well integrated into what a school is doing and willing to do.
Have you found, is it best district by district for that system change? Is it a state by state? Is it industries coming in and really trying to share their information?
I think all three models work. It really depends on the community. It depends on the state. And we have seen it work well statewide in places like Delaware, which is granted a fairly small state. They only have 100,000 students in the entire state, but we've seen it work really well there. Pockets of excellence in states across the country, in regions rather than statewide, and some areas where it's been really business-led. So it is very specific depending on the community, but it certainly we need to move more. It can't just be pockets of excellence. It has to be system-wide and reaching all students.
I would say stakeholder engagement is another big piece to that, making sure that there's not one champion. We're dealing with a lot of schools now in middle school, and we've taken our college curriculum and put it into middle school because all the teachers were begging for it at younger years. One of the things that we're seeing with schools in Southern California is that they have implemented CTE programs, for example, and they've gotten millions of dollars in funding. They don't know what to do with it. The teachers are overwhelmed by it. They have Paxton Patterson, sitting in the corner. They have Navient sitting there, and the teachers don't know what to do with it, and the parents don't understand what's going on. And so, getting that engagement of all the key stakeholders, I think, is a really, really important issue here. And then drilling down to the student level, students don't know what they don't know, and they're also they're not so ambitious when it comes to long-form learning anymore, to put it sensitively. They want everything in little snippets and bites. If the students don't understand why they're doing something, they're not going to do it. If employees don't know why they're doing something, they're not going to do it often, and that hits discretionary effort later when they're employees. But I think right now, helping students understand the why, helping the teachers, the parents, the administrators understand the why and getting them all on the same page is really fundamental, because sometimes they do have the resources and they do have the funding and they do have the program and they can't pull it all together.
To the funding piece, I would just like to make a push for those that aren't aware. The last reauthorization of the Perkins 5 CTE Act did allow for the expansion of funding to be used down to 5th grade for career exploration purposes. Not all states have implemented that, so if that's something that you're interested in, talk to your state leaders about making sure that's in your next Perkins plan.
I definitely think there's not a shortage of resources, for sure. Like there's so many programs and models and ideas and supports, but the challenge is who knows how to use them well enough to make the information relatable for youth? Who knows it well enough to be able to train other folks around how to use it? Virginia has a great tool called Virginia Education Wizard, and it's a website that has career interest inventories and work skills assessments, and essentially the same type of setup you'd expect from like Vita Novice, but they've kind of adapted a version for Virginia for middle schoolers and high schoolers and even adults who are trying to figure out what's next. But when I go to schools and talk about Virginia Education Wizard, they're like, huh? Yes, it is free. Students just have to create an account, and anyone can use it in the state. Now, I don't know about folks outside the state, but for sure, you could use Virginia Education Wizard. And it's a great tool, but very few people know about it and know how to use it well. I go and peddle it around, and they're like, are you sure? And not just Virginia Education Wizard. Knowing about the different CTE programs that exist in the state of Virginia that are publicly funded. I go around the schools and talk about the Fast Forward and the G3 program that funds short-term credentials. For most families, who makes family of 4 making $100K or less, it's funded at 100%. for them to get certain CTE credentials that are in demand around the state. Well, when I go around talking about it at schools or at CBOs, they're like, are you sure? It sounds too good to be true. I don't know. You direct them to the resources. So we've been kind of using our platform to connect CTE leaders to those who are leading these movements in the schools. If you call us out to give a talk on CTE opportunities, I'm calling up the leader of the Registered Apprenticeship Program, WIOA, Job Corps, Fast Forward, G3, Virginia Community College System. I'm calling them up to have a 10-minute segment to feature their program when we're talking about this to the schools. It's one thing for me to say it, it's another thing for them to have access to the folks who are leading them, and also know that they have an advocate to reach out to for support.
And can I just say also, we're piloting at Job Corps right now with these kids. I've worked with them for years. So I have kids who are coming out of foster care who say, I have all the money I need to get a college degree. Not a single person's talked to me about what college is, or how to get there, or what to do. So I think this conversation needs to happen again at every single level. We have to be checking in about what they know, what all the stakeholders know at every single level, because we're all getting information at different levels. We all have different perspectives, different exposure. It's all about the context and exposure at the end of the day for all of us practitioners and for the students.
Tamika, when a student and a family member walk into our college place, is it really easy for you to tell who's had middle school career exploration and who's had really good in freshman and sophomore year, as opposed to who's walking in junior or senior year and saying, okay, now I want to start?
Absolutely, there are some telltale signs. Students who have had that exposure in middle school tend to be a little bit more relaxed about, thinking about careers. They're not as stressed. Like, we start to see 11th and 12th graders pulling out hair because they get a lot of pressure at 11th and 12th grade year about making a decision, whereas 9th and 10th grade year is kind of like, see what's out there, maybe. Consider some colleges, but it's no real intentionality. Students who've had that support starting in middle school, they tend to be more intentional about how they choose courses in high school, how they choose experiences in high school. Some even want to pursue, going to professional conferences. They tend to have a lot more hope because they're able to prescribe that path a little bit more clear. They're able to see how to get to the end result. Not just what type of degree do I need, but what type of internships make sense for the type of job I want? Who should I get to mentor me in the process? So they've kind of gone through the weeds a little bit earlier and then moved through high school with more intentionality. But what I love about it is that they're more confident about what the end result is. That's what's missing with the persistence piece. Students don't feel confident that they're actually going to achieve the goal, so they get apprehensive and they kind of fall back and say, I'm going to default to what I already know, or things that I've seen my friends do, or folks in my family have been doing certain things I know are tried and true. It might not be lucrative, but it's tried and true. So the more opportunities that they have to kind of really explore and refine what their goals are, we tend to see those students move more confidently toward career attainment.
And really, they're building their network.
Yo, absolutely.
And it'll be a network that they'll tap into as they're running into struggles with their post-secondary education, because everyone does. And it'll be a network that's there when they're moving into their career pathway as well.
Absolutely. And they tend to be great advocates with getting their friends on board. They're like, what's taking you so long? There are times where I get an email from a kid that says, such and such told me to reach out to you because you helped him to make sense of it. And so they want the information, they just don't know who to trust and who to reach out to.
So you all have mentioned a couple of different tools through this discussion. Is there a particular model that you think is working really well, that if we had systems change at a state level or a federal level could really impact, because it's a scalable model that really is that secret sauce that might help us move forward?
So I can start. We 2 years ago now funded the expansion of a career readiness program in the state of Delaware to go statewide. Their concern was Delaware has a system that allows a lot of choice in high school. They have built out over the last years a really strong pathway model, but they found that kids were not, much like choosing college blindly, they were choosing these pathways blindly. They didn't know they didn't have any sense of why they might be going to a high school that specialized in healthcare or business or engineering, advanced manufacturing, whatever the path may be. And so they wanted to make sure that all middle school students in the state of Delaware leave middle school, in their words, knowing themselves, what it is that they want going forward. Now, this is just being piloted now and will be rolled out in the next couple of years. And the goal is to have this in every middle school in the state of Delaware. So more to come on that, but that idea of whole-scale system reform to make sure that every student is reached and we're not leaving anything to chance, that there is a very deliberate thinking around how kids are having these conversations with teachers, with counselors at that middle school age before they make choices about high school. And as you say, Tamika, can really plan out their high school future in a deliberate way that leads to greater student engagement and participation, and understand how all of this education sort of fits into the outside world and something they want to do long term. That having that intentionality is really, really important to keep kids motivated.
I think it also says something about that one decision as an 8th grader isn't locked in for the rest of their life.
Right,
and
absolutely.
It gives them the tools to check in and to know themselves and know how they change
Absolutely,
over time and grow. Over time, I think that's a great tool moving forward. Tamika, anything you know?
Well, successful programs, not to toot our own, but the college
Go
place
for it.
model. ECMC is a college place model. I'm really fortunate because it really allows us to stand in the gap. We have 7 locations throughout the country. In the state of Virginia, we have 2. But if you're in California, Colorado, Oregon, Connecticut, Minnesota, I feel like I'm missing one. But shout out to my colleagues. But we exist in 7 locations throughout the country, but it allows us, the model allows us to stand in the gap. From where I sit, we have partnerships with every high school, most of the middle schools, every youth-serving CBO in the state of Virginia. And so we built relationships with them over time to find out what are the blind spots. They trust our leadership and our expertise to say, hey, have you considered this? Have you considered offering this workshop? Have you considered this particular type of training? But they also know that they can call me in to give a workshop to parents and students on topics that they don't necessarily feel comfortable with discussing with folks. They tap into our expertise when it comes to leaning into supporting certain vulnerable populations. So students who are homeless, students who are undocumented, students who are in foster care, students who have disabilities. All of these students approach the career attainment process very differently. And not to mention financial aid, different implications as well. But what I love about the College Place model is that we really can be whatever we need to be for this school, be whatever we need to be for this CBO, to stand in the gap. And so I love the way in which we're able to be flexible, but also that they trust our expertise to actually follow through. We know it's one thing when folks bring in consultants to say, like, do this or do that. They may or may not follow through, but they trust us enough to follow through and give us feedback about what's working. So, yeah.
Jennifer?
Thank you. If I may be a self-serving plug, myself, having worked 30 years on this, we've got training down to a 24-hour model that's less than $100 a student. The outcomes that come from that are 80% feel more confident, more clear. When it's in college, we're getting up to 90% have a clear path for their success. I think self-efficacy is one of the most important things we can give our young people, some belief in their own future and their own potential. And what we find is when we give them a comprehensive opportunity to go through their own plans, that's not filled with pressure and not filled with anxiety and all wrapped in positive psychology, we find that 70% of them are more committed to their education because they understand why. Education is a tool to become more successful. It's a tool to more opportunity. And that contextualizes everything for them. So I'm a big fan of what we've built. I've spent my whole life on it. And I think, again, getting it into curriculum, getting them early exposure, making sure also that all the stakeholders know these statistics and everything we can do to get the great new models that are emerging all over this conference into the hands of educators. More power to us all.